And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today, September 24th, 267th day of the year. Only 98 days remain to the year's over with, and we get to start a new year. Holidays and observances. It's National Punctuation Day. World Bollywood Day. That, of course, is the colorful world of Indian cinema, full of captivating music and dance and drama that's going to transport you to another world. National Women's Health and Fitness Day. National Mofongo Day. And if you're not familiar with mofongo, it's a celebration of Puerto Rico's beloved dish, mofongo. Honors the unique blend of flavors and cultures that come together in this culinary delight. It's made of mashed plantains, garlic, pork cracklings, and other seasonings. It's a staple of Puerto Rican cuisine. And if you've never been to Puerto Rico, I suggest you go. It's a fascinating place. Bluebird of Happiness Day. National Fitness Day in the UK. Whether it's lifting weights, running a 5K, or just going for a walk. Taking care of your body is important for health and happiness. National Cherries Jubilee Day. Lash Stylist Day. Go get your eyelashes styled and give your lash stylist some extra support by posting their work online. International Day of Birmingham. Now, there's several Birminghams. We're talking about the one in the UK. And there's more than a dozen other Birminghams in North America. Together, this group makes up what might be known as the United States of Birmingham. The French official friendship agreements gathered by the Lord Mayor's chosen ambassador, Joe Harry Lycett, commit to a formal network and lasting friendship between all the Birminghams. And been to Birmingham, England, and Birmingham, Alabama. National Day of Arts and Care Homes. World Dense Breast Day. National Horchata Day. Now, if you're not familiar with horchata, it shows you really haven't enjoyed all of what the world has to offer. International Age Diversity Day. Heritage Day. International Week of Deaf People. And at that point, I have a malfunctioning system. Getting back to horchata, it's a sweet, creamy drink with a hint of cinnamon, made from rice and almonds and tiger nuts, depending on where you try it. Some versions are smooth and milky, and others are nutty and rich. The seed gathering season, Red Valley, Sea Otter Awareness Week, National Eye Health Week, Child Passenger Safety Awareness Week, Rosh Hashanah, which started Monday evening, National Older Workers Employment Week, Tirana International Film Festival, and seems to be several film festivals that have happened recently. Tirana is the most recent. Fiesta de San Pacho, it's a festival that honors St. Francis of Assisi. The Tirana International Film Festival is a celebration of cinema held in the heart of Albania. Brings together filmmakers and actors and movie enthusiasts from around the world. Includes a diverse range of films, including dramas and documentaries and animations. And the Fiesta de San Pacho is a celebration that fills the streets of Quibdó in Colombia with music and dance and color. It honors, as I said, St. Francis of Assisi, blends Catholic tradition with Afro-Colombian culture uniquely and joyfully. As the day unfolds, the city becomes a stage where people showcase their heritage through parades and performances. People I've known who've seen the festival say there's nothing like it anyplace else. Migraine Awareness Week, National Surgical Technologist Week, Milan Fashion Week. It will go on through Monday, September 29th. National Indoor Plant Week, Ontario Garlic Week, Recycle Now Week, National Drive Electric Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, and of course we have Oktoberfest, which started Saturday the 20th and is going to go on through October the 5th. Famous people born in this date: Phil Hartman, Ben Platt, Jim Henson, creator of the Muppets, and Stephanie McMahon. All right. We're now going to see what stories we have in the news. Of course, there's always something going on. And here we come. Maybe it's going to come up. Well, Jimmy Kimmel has finally addressed his comments. In fact, he choked up as he explains the Kirk comments, says he never intended to mock the assassination. Last night was the first show he hosted since Disney announced its return on Monday, after nearly a week off the air. Came out to a standing ovation, which continued into chants of Jimmy, 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 and ongoing cheering. I suspect a lot of that was staff. And he said, if you're just joining us, we're preempting your regularly scheduled encore episode of Celebrity Family Feud, bringing you this special report. And I'm happy to be here with you tonight. Went on to thank his fellow late-night talk show hosts, including Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart, and David Letterman, along with the right-leaning critics like Clay Travis and Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas. Then he addressed, though he did not apologize for, the comments that originally got him suspended. He said, I've been hearing a lot about what I need to say and do tonight, and the truth is, I don't think what I have to say is going to make much of a difference. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. I have no illusions about changing anybody's mind, but I want to make something clear because it's important to me as a human, and that is, it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. Then he began to tear up. From all accounts, he's a good actor. Said he posted a message on Instagram sending love to Kirk's family the day of his death. Well, a lot of the ABC affiliates are still refusing to carry his show. Well, a world leader has gone after President Trump. His bullish UN visit is going to continue as Ukraine and Iran poised to address the General Assembly. The Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, used his UN General Assembly speech Tuesday to blast President Trump's anti-drug policy as violent and ineffective and rooted in domination rather than public health. He said Colombia has achieved record cocaine seizures and extraditions under his government, but Trump decertified the country, a move he called unjust and politically motivated. Well, since most of the drugs we deal with come out of Colombia, it does raise questions. Well, Charlie Kirk's assassination suspect remains in special housing unit despite having completed a mental evaluation. Utah County Sheriff's Office said the suspect accused of assassinating Charlie Kirk remains within a special housing unit. Kirk was taken to a local hospital in critical condition following the shooting on September 10th at Utah Valley University. It's located in Orem, Utah, and that's where he died. Tyler Robinson has been charged with aggravated murder, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, and felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, as well as 2 counts of witness tampering and commission of a violent offense in the presence of a child. The Utah County Sheriff's Office Sergeant Ray Orman told Fox News that Robinson saw mental and medical staff at the jail, but he's still going to remain inside a special housing unit. And though he's been examined due to patient privacy regulations, what came out of his mental health evaluation can't be discussed. Well, the Mets announcers criticized Cubs player Matt Shaw for leaving the team to attend Charlie Kirk's funeral. Broadcaster Gary Cohen criticized Chicago Cubs player Matt Shaw for missing one of the team's games this past weekend because of Charlie Kirk's funeral. Cohen's comments came during SNY's broadcast of the Mets game against the Cubs on Tuesday night. While Shaw was up to bat in the 4th inning, he called that decision weird. He said, "I don't want to talk about any of the politics of it, but the thought of leaving your team in the middle of a race for any reason other than a family emergency strikes him as weird," according to Cohen. Well, Cohen and fellow Mets broadcaster Todd Zeile called Shaw's absence unprecedented. They were both broadcasters are criticized on social media for their comments about Shaw's absence. Well, Kamala Harris is in a circle put together a red file contingency plan a year before Biden dropped out, according to a book. That red file contingency plan was to be used in the event something traumatic happened to President Biden. That's according to former vice president in her new memoir entitled 107 Days. While the Biden campaign maintained he was running for re-election till the moment he suspended his campaign, Harris's brother-in-law, Tony West, created a succession plan long before the president's consequential announcement. At least that's what Harris had to say. West made a list of the first dozen calls to world leaders and political leaders, a plan for when she'd release her first statement, the rules of the transition. And the red file only grew as the pressure for Biden to drop out intensified, according to Harris. Well, New York Times accidentally pre-published the wrong verdict for the trial of would-be Trump assassin, Routh. That's the one that was hiding in the bushes, waiting for Trump to come by playing golf. Even though the New York Times said he was found not guilty, he was actually declared guilty on Tuesday on all charges. In journalism, outlets often pre-light obituaries, election outcomes, and potential court verdicts of major cases before they occur. Using the basic facts of the story and adding any key details are essential on the day of the actual publication. But a screenshot indicated New York Times accidentally published a headline, "Man found not guilty of trying to assassinate Trump in Florida." The lead of that now scrubbed article added, in a surprise verdict, a federal jury acquitted Ryan Routh of attempting to assassinate a major political candidate last year. Screenshot also indicated the article would be published in the print edition on September 24th. That's today. Well, podcast host and Fox News contributor Mary Catherine Ham posted a screenshot and wrote, just search Ron Rue's name at New York Times and got this result in the first head and subhead. I get it, y'all have some kind of pre-write, but why is it preloaded? He was just convicted on all charges. Well, surely this is indication that the New York Times thought Ralph ought to be given a do-over because he didn't get a chance to assassinate the president. Well, Brown University is going to cut 48 jobs, scrap 55 open positions following federal pressure, and a student's expose of Ivy League bloat. Alex Shee emailed 3,805 non-faculty employees asking, what do you do all day, before the university announced the layoffs. The layoffs at Brown prove that the message of bloated Brown has been true all along. A lot of these administrative positions were not necessary to begin with, according to Alex Shee, a former student at Brown. On Monday, Brown announced it's going to lay off those 48 positions and cut 55 unfilled budgeted positions, which the school said will no longer be pursued following the end of Brown's hiring freeze. She was a former student at Brown who was cleared of wrongdoing by the university in May. He previously angered officials by sending a Doge-like email to non-faculty employees identifying himself as a journalist for the Brown Spectator, asking them what they do all day to try to determine why the school's tuition had gotten so expensive. Now, the Brown Spectator is a right-leaning publication, has a board of 3 people, including Shee. It was revived this year after it ceased publication in 2014. Well, the board members faced a disciplinary hearing on May 7th over allegations they violated Brown University's name, licensing, and trademark policies. The Brown did not like criticism. Well, the Major League Baseball star was visibly shaken up. David Fry hit in the face by a 99-mile-per-hour fastball during a bunt attempt. This happened at Progressive Field during the Cleveland Guardians-Detroit Tigers game Tuesday night, when Guardians' David Fry was hit in the face by a foul tip on a bunt attempt. Bottom of the 6th, with the Guardians down 2-1, there were runners in the corners with no outs when Tariq Skubal delivered a 2-1 pitch to Fry, who turned to square for a sacrifice bunt. But unfortunately, that 99-mile-per-hour fastball from Skubal was too far inside. Fry made contact with the pitch. It hit the top of his bat and redirected off the bat into his face. Shocked everybody. Well, comedian Guy Brunham claims a passenger elbowed him on a Delta flight for being too fat for the passenger sitting next to. Said he was left with bruises after an alleged altercation with a fellow passenger during a recent flight on Delta Airlines. September 14th, the 49-year-old actor shared a video on Instagram in which he said he was sitting in the middle seat when a man sat down next to him and complained he didn't have enough space. Brunham said the man then elbowed him and told him he was too fat to fly. Well, the Secret Service is investigating after the President and the First Lady got on the UN escalator and it malfunctioned. There were those that said it was sabotage. White House Press Secretary Karen Leavitt called for the firing and investigation of those responsible for a stalled escalator that carried President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump at Tuesday's United Nations General Assembly. This malfunction occurred before President Trump addressed the General Assembly in New York, and He and the First Lady were forced to walk up the stall machine before making his remarks to the world leaders. The feeling was it stopped, so he'd be motionless for another assassination attempt. At least that's what the Secret Service believed. Well, Trump and Zelensky signaled stronger ties after the UN meeting. Better relations than before, was the comment made. Ukrainian President Zelensky told Fox News anchor Brett Bauer in an exclusive interview with Special Report that his relationship with President Trump had grown stronger and closer, with more frequent communication and stronger alignment on how to handle the ongoing war with Russia. Well, Russia seems to be trying to start something with several European countries. Well, North Carolina lawmakers have passed Irina's Law, designed to eliminate cashless bail after the Charlotte train stabbing. Irina Zarutska was allegedly killed by suspect DeCarlos DeJuan Brown Jr. on a light rail train August 22nd, in what investigators are calling a random act of violence. Been charged with first-degree murder. The Irina's Law calls to eliminate the condition to release the defendant on a written promise to appear, to provide for a new procedure to have defendants with suspected mental health issues to be evaluated for involuntary commitment, and also to modify the laws related to pretrial release to provide stricter guidelines for defendants charged with violent offenses and defendants with extensive criminal histories. The bill passed 82-30 in the North Carolina House and now is going to the governor, Josh Stein, Democrat. He may or may not sign it. And from what I read, a non-attorney justice of the peace let him out on his own recognizance. He may or may not appear for the trial. Well, we've been talking about a lot of strange stories over the last few shows. A lot of progressives are bouncing off the walls about what they call President Trump's cruel agenda. In fact, a progressive just won an Arizona seat backed by AOC and Bernie Sanders. And Keith Olbermann has apologized to Scott Jennings for a threatening post. FBI got involved. Olbermann told Jennings, "You're next." Well, let's talk about our main stories for today. We've been talking about haunted theme parks. And one of the most haunted, of course, is the original Six Flags over Texas. But it's not the only Six Flags that has stories of paranormal events. In New Orleans, we have Six Flags Jazzland, a park that was built in 2000, was only open for a few years. In 2005, it was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina. And for such a short life, you'd think there'd be little time to build up any paranormal activity. But it's not incidents at the park, but rather where it was built that seems to be the origin of the paranormal activity that's been witnessed in the long-closed park. You know, given its location, it seems fitting that an act of nature caused the park's almost complete destruction. Not only was the park hit by the hurricane, but drainage pumps designed to protect it from such an emergency failed. And then the levee protecting the area from Lake Pontchartrain broke. The park was inundated and flooded to a depth of 8 to 10 feet. Seems like someone or something really hated this particular park. Maybe it was the spirits of the long dead, as this area is the site of an ancient Native American burial ground. And because the area was swampy, Native American tribes built up large mounds, or middens as they're referred to. They're made of shells from a nearby lake, and they buried their dead inside these middens. Due to the size of the mounds discovered at this location, there are those that believe they're most likely the burial places of important figures from the local tribes. But the developers ignored the mounds, bulldozed them flat, and filled the area with more dirt to elevate the park above the swamp waters. Now, since the park's closure, it's been the favorite location of vandals and urban explorers. And because of its remote location, law enforcement rarely, if ever, checks on the property. The park sits in a swamp, thickly overgrown, and everything metal is rusted over. And graffiti covers every inch of exposed concrete, wood, or remaining structure. And the area remains flooded. It's never been drained. Because the pumps in the levee were never repaired, the area is surrounded by deep, stagnant swamp water. Now, the elevated areas of the park are accessible, but much of the park has been reclaimed by the swamp. And water is deep enough that all manner of wildlife in the area are to be found in the park. Some of the most dangerous, of course, are the alligators. They're plentiful all over the southern part of the United States, and in this park they're a particular menace. Now, the presence of alligators is important in this story for a very relevant reason. Alligators are very important to the culture of the tribes in the area and are considered sacred animals by the Native Americans. And they seem attracted to this location in large numbers, which from a paranormal perspective does make some sense. Native American lore, the alligator was considered a villain and sent to do terrible things to people on Earth when the gods felt they deserved it. In this particular case, it would make sense that these guardians were sent to watch over the desecrated graves of important souls and attack those responsible for the desecration. Alligators can be seen sunning themselves in open areas around the park. And even worse, they can't be seen just under the surface of the shallow water surrounding the park. For all its size and bulk, an alligator can launch itself in the water and sprint amazingly fast to take down its prey. Careful examination of the dark, stagnant waters in the park usually reveal more than one set of prehistoric eyes watching the shore. And their alligators are aggressive. They go after prey of almost any size. And humans are no challenge for them and are in fact easy pickings. Alligator attack happens in a flash, leaving no time to react. There's no shouting a warning or running away. Speed of the attack, especially in contrast to its usual sluggish movement, is especially startling. And if you've never seen an alligator perform a death roll, you'll know how devastating these acts can be on a prey. Now, there's been one reported incident of a visual encounter with a phantom. It was a brightly lit day. 3 young men were exploring the park. As they walked, they saw ahead of them a shadow figure cross their path several times. The figure walked casually and occasionally seemed to pause as if watching them. And once it came up behind a building in front of the 3 and turned and walked away from the young men in the same direction they were traveling. They ran to catch up with this figure, but simply turned a corner to avoid him. When the young men got to that corner, that figure was nowhere to be seen. But shortly, it was back in front of them. Well, the 3 young men split up and attempted to head off that figure. They all ran, meeting up after circling the area, but none of them saw the figure. After attempt to catch up to it, it was never seen again. It didn't reappear. They couldn't describe the figure, but said it was semi-see-through and looked like a shadow even in the direct sunlight. And all 3 claimed to have a strong sense that the shadowy figure couldn't physically hurt them, but it was attempting to lead them somewhere where they'd be hurt or something terrible would happen. Maybe lead them to an alligator. Sighting was a bit messy from a paranormal reporting point of view. Crosses over to other paranormal activities or falls under a different classification altogether. Situations very similar to events described right before reported alien abduction. Shadow people or shadow demons or whatever you want to call them are also described before a possession. Well, today the park's overgrown skeleton can still be seen from nearby interstate. And even from a distance and the safety of a vehicle, the place makes people uneasy. If you visit the park, even on a sunny day, it's incredibly unnerving. Paranormal activity started shortly after the park closed. Visitors to the park in the last few years most commonly report loud banging and muted voices. And almost always, they report an eerie presence that makes one feel like they're being watched. And nighttime visitors report hearing the muted, mumbling voices the most, as well as lights are seen flickering. The flickering lights are particularly fascinating because it's so frequently reported. Of course, there's no electricity in the park, so what's causing the flickering lights is impossible to explain. Well, not to be outdone, another haunted location is Disneyland in Anaheim, California. It's supposedly haunted by a lot of ghosts. And some of these can be traced back to tragic deaths that occurred here and a bit of purposefully overlooked history of that area. Anaheim Park was actually the first Disney theme park. It was known as Disneyland Park to distinguish it from the other theme parks in the area. It opened July 17, 1955. It was the only theme park to be designed and constructed under Walt Disney's personal supervision. Before Disney, Anaheim was a rural community of orange groves. It was an enormous piece of land now developed and blanketed with homes and businesses. In 1924, the infamous Ku Klux Klan had several members elected to the Anaheim City Council. They ran on a platform of political reform, and they framed the mostly German American population of the time as elites that were corrupt to the core. The Klan attempted to create what they perceived as a perfect community. First thing they did was to fire all city employees that weren't associated with the Klan and put Klan members in their place. Well, fortunately for everybody concerned, there was an opposition to the Klan in Anaheim that took steps to stop them. They got a copy of the secret membership list of all the Klansmen in the state and disseminated it. Local Klan actually collapsed. The Klansmen in government positions either stepped down or were recalled. And most of the Klan left the area shortly after that. Well, during the short time the Klan was in control, there were rumors of threats and beatings and even the murder of anybody who opposed them. Business and political rivals were routinely threatened, and the Klansmen enjoyed a quick rise to power. No telling what poor souls were murdered in some remote orange grove during this time that's now the location of a home, business, or even a theme park. You need to keep this in mind as you read about the various hauntings reported at Disneyland and consider that the source may be something that predates the park itself. Now, there's been a story of the ghost of Walt Disney himself haunting the apartment he kept above the fire station on Main Street. Story is that a light in the window was turned off every evening when he left. After he died, that apartment was kept intact as a sort of shrine, and every evening that light was turned off by an employee. Every morning when the cast and crew of Disneyland returned, that light would be on. It's claimed that the cast member who returned to see the light still lit heard Walt say, "I'm still here." Well, the question arises at this point, who was that cast member? Well, there's actually no written record of that encounter that can be found. And there were never any other witnesses to this activity. It was never allowed to be studied. Now, this story could have been concocted for publicity or maybe simply a way for the Disney company to send the message that Walt Disney always lived in their hearts. And there have been numerous sightings of Walt's ghost all over the park by cast members. Even park guests have claimed to see Walt Disney wandering about the park. And in addition to his apartment, located above the Main Street firehouse, he seems to love randomly appearing in the park at odd times. Now, there have been no substantial reports of these sightings, so it's difficult to compare the details. So while the ghost of Walt Disney is maybe not the most credible story, that's not to say Disneyland doesn't have its share of paranormal activity. Been a number of encounters that seem to have more validity based on the inciting event, number of sightings, consistency of details, and the various unconnected witness statements. One of them is The Pirates of the Caribbean. It's a standout attraction in almost all respects. It's over 50 years old, been constantly upgraded, but it is essentially the same ride designed and built by Walt Disney. It's the last attraction he would personally design and oversee construction of. And after all the decades that have passed and all the leaps in technology and entertainment, Pirates of the Caribbean is still considered one of the most immersive attractions ever created for an amusement park. Possible source for the paranormal activity on the attraction can be traced back to the ride's construction. All the original bones and skulls and complete skeletons in the ride, and there are quite a number, were real and might still be. Officially, these skeletons were obtained from the UCLA Medical School, but there are stories of skeletons being bought from questionable sources. A real human skeleton isn't cheap now and wasn't cheap then, but Walt Disney spared no expense. The ride's creation was enormously expensive, and Disney always sought ways to cut costs. One example is the costumes that the animatronic figures wore. Costume designers said they should have 2 or 3 extra sets of clothing for all the figures because their wear out need to be replaced. Walt Disney said no. Frivolous expense. 1 set was enough, and the costumes could be repaired or replaced as needed. Well, as a side note, 2 sets were made despite his objections. When a fire broke out that destroyed a few of the figures, the staff was able to get things up and running again quickly because of the duplicate sets of costumes. And given the history of cost-cutting decisions, it was very possible that an alternative, cheaper source was utilized to get all the bones needed for the ride. And there are a lot of theories as to where the remains came from. If you think about Disney's official answer, rather than taking it at face value, you no doubt have some questions. Now, what legitimate source would provide human remains to decorate a ride in a theme park? Do medical schools make it a practice to sell human skeletons to theme parks, especially in such large quantities? Was this a legitimate and documented exchange? Why did nobody object to real skeletons being used at the time? Well, there are actually several different stories about where those skeletons came from. Assuming the rumors were true, dressing a desecrated skeleton of a deceased person like a pirate and posing them to look like they were playing chess or drinking wine at a bar can easily be the cause of spiritual unrest. And then there's the concept of haunted items. There's a theory with good evidence that suggests that items can be haunted. A spirit or the energy of the dead is said to latch onto something and travel with a beloved item. In the highly decorated sets of the ride, there are numerous places where sets are lavishly dressed and treasures are piled high. With so many valuables and personal possessions, it's a little surprised that some might be haunted by a previous owner. There's one scene in particular that's said to contain a few very high-profile objects. In it, a skeleton lies in a bed with a magnifying glass looking at a map. Now, the story is that these are the remains of an important religious figure, and the glass he holds was buried with him. And the skull on the headboard behind him is said to be that of his wife. Then there's the scattering of human remains or ashes. Now, this, of course, is a relatively recent phenomenon, as people love to sneak the ashes of a loved one into an attraction and spread them in the waters of the ride. And there are more stories every year of spectral children and even a few adults seen wandering in the ride or sitting in one of the boats and then disappearing. Now, there aren't enough of these stories yet to actually study the events, but maybe they do present a pattern. Suppose the ashes of many individuals are dumped in the same spot. In that case, multiple spirits may be moving on from this spot, so it makes sense the sightings would never be consistent in most respects. Final source of a possible haunting is a death that occurred shortly after the ride opened. It was a young boy, said to be 4 or 5, who was standing up on the ride, held up by an adult. He slipped from the adult's grasp and fell into the water in the large room where a pirate ship and a fort fired their cannon at each other. When the ride first opened, it lacked almost all the alarms and sensors and equipment we have present today. So the panicked parents had to wait until the ride ended to report the incident. Well, of course, the ride was immediately stopped and all the lights were turned on. Employees entered the ride to search for the child. One employee came across the boy standing in the water by the pirate ship. He looked upset. but he didn't look hurt or too severely shaken up. The water wasn't deep, so the boy could stand up. He was alone when the lights came on and decided to wade over to the ship. And he stood there waiting until a park employee arrived. Well, the park employee jumped into the water, misjudged the depth, and hit hard on his feet sooner than he expected. The girl standing beside him saw him fall back and strike his head on the concrete edge of the waterway. He went under the water and drowned himself. Well, it's reported occasionally that the spot is icy cold and the young man's face can be seen looking up from the waters, startled as if he had no idea what had happened. The original Haunted Mansion opened up in 1969 at the Anaheim location. And like the Pirates of the Caribbean, the Haunted Mansion has many reports of paranormal activities occurring on the premises. These specific incidents can't be explained by special effects or displays in the attraction. And although not specifically associated with the Haunted Mansion, a ghost frequently walks about the area at night. It's believed to be the ghost of a man who crashed his plane nearby. After he died, he was said to have drug himself several hundred yards to the spot where the Haunted Mansion is today. Well, he must have been in great pain based on the numerous broken bones and other injuries he suffered. And specifically associated with the Haunted Mansion reports of a little boy seen crying at the exit of the ride. This was supposedly due to the sprinkling of the little boy's ashes in the ride. Belief is that he was too young to understand why he had passed and is confused as to why he's trapped inside the ride. So he walks about crying, and wherever anybody attempts to help him, he runs away, usually deeper into the ride, and simply disappears. There have been no known attempts to release the boy's spirit from that location. An exorcism might be beneficial, but then again, Space Mountain's a roller coaster in the dark that simulates being in space. In the ride, an apparition of a large man with red hair is often seen. Sometimes he's said to have a red face, and whether that means he's simply flushed or blushing or his face is unnaturally red like paint or makeup is stated. Always seen sitting next to single riders in the dark ride and is gone when the ride ends. Well, shortly after the monorail was open and operational, a teenager climbed a fence into Disneyland and was hit by the monorail. This was in June 1966. A teenager allegedly performing a dare on graduation night. And it's not clear if he was walking along the tracks or jumped onto them in front of the monorail. Also not known if he had been drinking. There are also reports he might have been fleeing a security guard at the time he was hit. According to the story, his ghost can be seen running along the monorail tracks at night. Sometimes he's actually reported to be on the train itself. That story is based on the death of Thomas Guy Cleveland. He was 19 years old. And newspapers reported he was killed when he attempted to sneak into Disneyland along the monorail track. He had scaled the park's 16-foot-high outer fence. In the official accounts, he ignored a security guard's shouted warning that a train was coming. And when he finally attempted to avoid the train, he could only climb down onto a canopy beneath the track. He wasn't clear of the train and he was hit and killed. He was actually dragged about 40 feet down the track. Well, in May of 1964, Mark Maples was killed on the ride called the Matterhorn. That's a steel rail roller coaster with bobsleds. Witnesses claim the 15-year-old tried to stand up at the peak of the ride after unbuckling his seatbelt. Well, he was thrown from the ride, fracturing his skull and breaking several ribs. He also suffered massive internal injuries. Well, in 1984, under almost the same circumstances, an older woman, 48 years of age, and by the name of Dolly Young, was thrown from the ride at virtually the same spot. It wasn't known whether she intended to unbuckle her seatbelt or not. She was thrown into the path of another bobsled and became pinned underneath it. Her wounds are horrific and consisted of deep lacerations and crushing injuries. Both spirits are said to haunt the ride, but they're never seen together. Seems to be no association between the two at all. Dolly appears where she fell at all times of day and night, and the ghost of Mark appears only at night and in the lower portions of the ride, like the loading platform and under the tracks. Now, neither apparitions ever reported to be threatening, and in fact, doesn't seem to be aware of the living. These sightings seem to come from the repetition of some negative energy in the area rather than a trapped soul acting out. Then we have Tom Sawyer's Island. 1973, two brothers, 18 and 10, stayed on the island after the park closed. After they explored a bit, they decided that being alone on the island with the sunlight fading wasn't as much fun as they expected it to be. They became concerned about being trapped on the island all night. What they didn't know was that in the water surrounding the island and where it was thought to be safe to swim across during the little daylight they had left rather than in the dark. Being trapped on the island all night sounded miserable. They didn't want to be discovered the next day and get in trouble either. As they started to cross the rivers of America, the older brother went under the water. He seemed to struggle to get above the surface, but went under and never came back up. The younger brother, of course, tried to help his older brother, but he was only 10 and couldn't see under the murky water. He swam to shore and got help from park employees. Well, the body of the older brother wasn't found till the next day. And ever since this event occurred, there have been reports of paranormal activity in the area. Almost always, the reports include the surface of the water rippling and splashing like a person struggling at that spot. No cause for the disturbance of the water has ever been found. Since then, there have been a multiple number of reports of a low-hanging ball of fog or maybe an orb floating above the water and in the spot where it's thought the boy died. Well, while Disneyland parks are actually incredible, their long history inevitably means that there have been accidents. When the parks were built, safety standards are nowhere near what they are today. And as bucket list attractions, we also see a lot of people scattering their ashes there, which is a possible source of paranormal activity. But with so many rides having rumors of hauntings, Disneyland in Anaheim has to be one of the most haunted theme parks in the U.S. Certainly it's the most haunted Disney park. We went there, before we got married. And every time my wife would stop to look at something, I'd look down and there'd be money on the ground. Well, in Princeton, West Virginia, we got the Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. Now, it's one of the creepiest places on earth, according to a lot of folks. Built in 1926 and closed in 1966, it sat abandoned for nearly 60 years. There have been only brief bouts of official activity. In the last few decades, it's primarily been visited by only the bravest of folks, the most foolhardy, or those ignorant of its past. Might not have the same number of ghosts as other parks or the same level of infamy, but Lake Shawnee Amusement Park is undoubtedly one of the most haunted parks in the world. It saw several deaths during its operation and is built on a massive ancient gravesite. Now, the park is located in Mercer County, West Virginia, built at a location with a history of violence and death. Interestingly, the oldest obvious source of paranormal activity here is the most recently discovered. In a recent attempt to reclaim the land around Lake Shawnee, an archaeologist discovered the area was home to two or more separate Native American settlements. These locations were abandoned hundreds of years before any settlers from Europe arrived. So this begs the question, was the land already under some ancient curse? In 1988, a Native American burial ground was discovered. After the first few bodies were unearthed, archaeologists sampled other areas of the property and, given the data collected at the site and existing historical knowledge, determined that the mass grave was huge, contained at least 3,000 bodies. Bodies were almost all women and children who seemed to have died from an illness. So that makes you have to ask, where were the men? Were they at war? Were they somehow immune to whatever this illness was? What happened here was a tragedy of epic proportions that no doubt generated a lot of negative energy. It's also a sacred ground that was desecrated by the park's construction. Then there's the infamous Clay family massacre that took place in 1783. The father of a family of settlers, a man named Mitchell Clay, was out hunting when a group of Native Americans killed his youngest son, Bartley, stabbed the daughter Tabitha to death, and kidnapped his eldest son, Ezekiel. Was a precursor to this event, long-standing tensions existed between the Native Americans and the European settlers. Misunderstandings between the cultures led to tensions, and the tensions escalated to violence, culminated with the ambush by the Native Americans. Well, in a rage, fueled by grief and anger, Clay got together a group of settlers to exact revenge on the Native Americans. Before he left his mission, he buried his children and swore at their graveside that his deaths would be avenged and their older brother would return home. Well, this group of settlers set off and tracked the Native Americans to Ohio. They discovered Ezekiel's body, but they didn't find anybody else. He had actually been burned at the stake. There was evidence he had been tortured for days before he was killed. Well, denied his revenge and able to fulfill his oath to his children, he was enraged. His spirit broke and his heart hardened. Went back to his farm, where he became embroiled in a land dispute with a neighboring family, the Drapers. And there were more deaths and disease and destruction of property. Now, destruction of property at that time was far more devastating than it is today. An inoperative mill or a pump or a broken tool or a fence in the livestock escape could mean extreme hardship and even death. Well, Clay was a man who had been pushed to the edge and he laid waste to the Drapers and ultimately himself. Property was once again left to nature for many decades. It wasn't until the 1920s that a businessman by the name of Conley Snidow purchased the property where the Clay farm once stood in the mass grave site, turned the land into an amusement park. First, he built the swing ride, then the Ferris wheel. Also opened a pond on the property for swimming. So you have to ask yourself, was it coincidental that the first attractions he opened at the park were the same ones associated with paranormal activity? While the park was in operation, several people also died. In the early years, an adult was flung from the swing ride and died on impact with a tree. In the 1960s, a small girl hit a truck that had been backed into the path of the swings. There have been a lot of accidents and mishaps associated with the swings. Still, these are largely hearsay, as the park staff is actively discouraged from documenting anything. Then a boy drowned in the pond. There weren't many safety precautions around the swimming hole, and hundreds of kids and adults swam in that pond. Its water was murky, and there had been a lot of close calls reported before the ones documented that resulted in death. By the 60s, people's expectations of amusement parks had gone beyond what Lake Shawnee could offer. In a post-Disney world, many traditional amusement parks perished. Safety and comfort and great thrills with high production values were expected, even demanded. Spinning on an old swing where fingers were pinched and the rusty chains or even badly cut were no longer acceptable. So by 1966, the park shut its gates and been decaying ruin ever since. According to popular culture and many recent visitors to the park, the place is an active spot of paranormal activity. With every passing year, the remains of the park become more difficult to find. The roads overgrown and poorly marked and making it easy to miss. And the lake itself is unimpressive, small, and not very scenic at all. People stay away in droves, afraid of what they've heard or what they've personally experienced. And due to its reputation, paranormal investigators have been drawn to the site over the last few years, though. They report encounters that include the sound of children laughing, chains clanking where none were nearby on a windless day, and even objects moving of no obvious cause. Most commonly reported phenomena is when the swings on the swing ride move on their own, despite there being no gust of wind. And there have been reported visions of a small girl in a frilly dress skipping through the park or crying on one of the swings. And young children have been spotted sitting on the Ferris wheel and rocking the cars. The land's new owner reports he can hear the swings creaking regularly when there's no wind. And there have been a lot of reports of the little girls showing up at odd spots in the park and even in vehicles like tour buses. And to top it all off, there's reportedly a videotape of a safety bar on the Ferris wheel opening up by itself in the middle of the night. Well, Lake Shawnee has been long abandoned. It closed before most modern parks opened up, but its ruins remain. Few people visit, though. The mass graveyard seems to be the likely source of paranormal activity on this spot. A grave site containing 3,000 people is large by any standard. But for the time and the place, that was an enormous number of bodies. Even the Clay family massacre might have been rooted in the presence of this mass grave. Well, amusement parks are fun places to visit, but if you're a ghost hunter, you might be able to have twice the fun when visiting some of the parks we're going to be talking about. If you plan to visit anywhere featured in any of the things that I talk about, my advice is to be careful, get permission, and take proper safety precautions. Some of the attractions I have discussed and will be discussing are, of course, off limits, and you might be ejected from the park if spotted. And others might be completely abandoned, and the landowner might not take too kindly to trespassers. And there might be dangers like the alligators that I talked about. And by all means, you need to be respectful. If the ghost of the activity comes from a tragic event, it goes without saying this area should be treated with respect. Well, there's a lot of amusement parks around the world that are rumored to be haunted. So you need to do some research before you make your visit. Learn where to look, and you might just find more than you bargained for. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. And once again, we'll be talking about stories that are strange and unusual. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.